So there's currently a bill going through the Missouri legislature that may very well make establish censorship boards across the state. However, I have already covered that on covered that rather extensively on a live stream, so it's time to focus on the family. So, for those of you who haven't already seen it, I highly suggest looking at Skeptic She's video on Focus on the Family. Her announcement that she was doing this video kind of forced me to get off my butt and do this one. It's a very good kind of general overview, especially when you're looking into what Focus on the Family is now. This video is kind of looking more at kind of their history and also their contributions to evangelical propaganda, both explicit and implicit. So, should be a hell of a ride. Let's get started. Started in 1977 by Dr. James Dobson, who oversaw the organization up until the mid-2000s. I'm thinking 2003 or 2008. Now that I think about it, it is 2000. As far as I'm aware, it's 2008. I may be a couple years off. But now they began small in usually doing family counseling radio shows and radio dramas, and their radio series for kids, which anyone who's well aware, anyone who's familiar with Focus on the Family, it's called Adventures in Odyssey. This is mostly a slice of life kind of series, that teaches biblical lessons through the experiences of kids and other people in this fictional town called Odyssey, which is somewhere in the USA. I don't think it's ever explicitly, mentioned as being in any particular state, something akin to Springfield in The Simpsons. Yeah, Christian Springfield. Oh, lovely. But everyone says, "Highly ho, neighbor." No, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist. But now, they kind of continue this way up through the 80s with, their radio dramatizations and their kind of counseling show and Adventures in Odyssey. And then they began partnering with other Christian media producers, most notably Tyndale House and Zondervan, to make video productions, such as video versions of Adventures in Odyssey stories, where they teamed with Zondervan to make The Story Keepers, which was a particularly, one could say a particularly propagandistic series featuring a group of early Christians in Rome under the reign of Nero. All of these deserve a lot more depth, and I will likely go into more depth if I get good feedback on this video. So please go ahead, drop comments. McGee and Me, which is video adaptations of books written by our old friend Bill Meyer, who's who I covered his Forbidden Door series for last month's, last year's Lit Month. And so the 90s was largely where we see a lot more of the more blatant propaganda when it comes to when it comes to what was being actually produced by Focus on the Family. Nowadays, at least going by their online store, they don't really produce much for kids aside from the occasional Adventures in Odyssey video, and it looks like they're mostly focusing on distributing videos from Big Idea, aka the people who bring you VeggieTales. But in the 2000s, they released a much more implicit guide to propagandization called Plugged In Online, which is a review site where you can go online and they will review movies. They review like every movie that's coming out, and they will go through every single instance of swearing, every instance of a character having a cigarette. They will go through and list everything that could be seen as, controversial or seen as against a parent's moral values, and they will, go through every instance of the movie of violence, spirituality, i.e. other spiritualities, or if it gels with how they interpret the Bible, then they'll give props for that. And they will it's literally a guide to how a parent can control their kids' access to certain media, because they can say, oh, this is bad for these reasons, so you're not allowed to watch that. Or, okay, this is okay because we've read through the review. And so that in and of itself is very, I find very problematic. Coming from a media restricted household, I will say that that Focus on the Family has seemed to transition from blatantly propagandizing to kids and more focused on political issues, and it seems to have coincided with Dr. James Dobson stepping down from his active role as chairman, and the new guy taking over. I forget what his name is. It's not entirely important for the purpose of this video. And as per Skeptic She's video, it's very much how they're operating nowadays. But they do have a history of producing programs that have been, that are directed at indoctrinating kids into what they call a biblical worldview, which, as per my last video, you can kind of see is something I don't necessarily agree with, to understate the things a little bit. So, and I do plan on going through and how the various things I've mentioned, more particularly Adventures in Odyssey and the Story Keepers, are Christian propaganda. I haven't seen or read McGee and Me, but I can't in good conscience see things coming from the mind of Bill Maher as being anything other than blatantly trying to force Christianity down the viewers' or readers' throats. Also, in correlation with Tyndale House Publishing, they did radio adaptations, radio dramatizations of Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins' Left Behind series, which it was a really big thing when it came to evangelicals, because it's, the fear that you're going to get left behind in the rapture, etc. That largely covers a lot of what I've looked into. Tyndale House Publishing does look like an interesting thing to look into, or more specifically, the Moody Bible Institute, which focus on the family and Tyndale have strong ties to, and they produced a very almost chick tract-y series of like deconversion or conversion stories as radio dramatizations, about how terrible someone's life was, and then they found Jesus, and now it's all better, that kind of story. But it does seem to me that Tyndale House Publishing and Focus on the Family are were very closely interrelated, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s when they were having their big media push. A lot of Tyndale's more prominent authors are on the board of Focus on the Family, and like I said, that Tyndale was their more prominent partner when they were releasing these videos, except in the case of Zondervan, where that was their, it was kind of a side project, it seems to me. So there you have it, a bit of a look at what, at the evangelical propaganda stage of Focus on the Family. I still view them as largely a evangelical propaganda mill, even though they are less focused on propagandizing to children and more for political purposes. Like, for instance, in the late 90s, they started an outreach program that's, as far as I can tell, is still going on to this day, where they use ultrasounds to emotionally blackmail people from having abortions. So there's that. But, it's a look at an organization that very much shaped my childhood and, had a hand in indoctrinating me. But I will be happy to do a more in-depth video on Adventures in Odyssey, a more in-depth video on the Story Keepers, and a more in-depth video on Plugged In, if any of you are interested. So go ahead, give a like, share, comment, all the YouTube things. Let me know what, let me know what you think about this. And, just remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, yeah. I know we'll have a good time then. was either that or Colorado Rocky Mountain High.